A 69-year-old man walks into a church in Harlem, and nothing about the moment feels ordinary, even before anyone fully understands why. This isn't just any man, and this isn't just any visit. This is someone who spent decades at the very top, someone Hollywood built up, protected, and celebrated for over 40 years. Yet on this day, he isn't there to promote a film, accept an award, or make a statement crafted by a team. He's there for something deeply personal, something that doesn't fit into the usual script of fame. As he steps forward, there's a quiet weight to everything he does. Like this moment has been waiting for him longer than anyone realizes. People watching the live stream don't fully grasp it yet, but they can feel it. This isn't a spontaneous decision or a late life impulse. It feels like the closing chapter of a story that started decades ago. And as the realization begins to settle in, one thing becomes clear. This isn't just a man walking into a church. This is a man stepping away from something much bigger and possibly leaving behind an entire world that wants to find him. Just weeks before this moment, something subtle but important had already happened, and most people overlooked it completely. In a conversation that seemed casual on the surface, he said something that didn't quite fit the usual tone of Hollywood interviews. He spoke about faith, not in a vague or neutral way, but directly, almost like someone who had already made up his mind about something. He pointed out that talking about God openly in that world isn't exactly welcomed, not because people don't believe, but because they're expected to keep it quiet, controlled, and in the background. The way he said it didn't sound like frustration. It sounded like clarity, like someone who had already accepted the consequences of speaking honestly. And then he added something that felt even more revealing, suggesting that you can't fully embrace that side of yourself and still expect to thrive in the system the same way. That line didn't cause immediate outrage, but it lingered, because it didn't feel like speculation. It felt like someone speaking from experience. And looking back, it becomes obvious that this wasn't just a comment. It was a signal, a quiet indication that something bigger was coming, and that he had already decided which side he was on. As the moment unfolds, what shocks people isn't just what he's doing, but how quietly it happens. There are no headlines leading up to it, no interviews hinting at a major life shift, no carefully orchestrated reveal. Instead, it happens in real time, in front of people who weren't even expecting to witness something historic. He stands there, dressed in white, not as a performer, but as someone fully present, fully aware of what this moment means. When he finally speaks, his voice carries something different. There's no performance in it, no exaggeration, no attempt to impress. Just honesty. He admits it took time, and that simple admission carries decades of weight behind it. This isn't about reinvention or publicity. It feels like arrival. The kind of arrival that only happens after years of internal conflict, questions, and decisions made far away from cameras. And what makes it even more powerful is that nothing about it is explained outright. There's no long speech breaking it down. Yet somehow everyone watching understands that this moment is bigger than it appears. Because underneath it all, there's a realization forming. This wasn't sudden at all. This was planned, built, and lived long before anyone noticed. There's a moment most people remember, but almost no one fully understands. It happened during one of the most talked about nights in recent entertainment history, when everything seemed to spiral out of control in seconds. In the middle of that chaos, while the world focused on what was happening on stage, something quieter happened behind the scenes. He pulled someone aside and delivered a message that sounded simple at first, but carried a deeper meaning. He warned him about the danger of reaching the highest point, suggesting that those moments come with risks people don't always see. At the time, it was interpreted as guidance, maybe even just support in a stressful situation. But when you look at it now, in the context of everything else, it feels different. It feels like insight from someone who has already seen what happens at the top and chose not to get consumed by it. It wasn't just advice. It was perspective shaped by decades of experience. And more importantly, it hinted at something else, that he had been navigating this world carefully for a long time, aware of things others were only starting to notice. And that awareness didn't start there. It goes back much further. While many people assume success in that world requires full immersion, his life tells a different story. Instead of fully embracing the culture around him, he seemed to create distance from it in ways that weren't always obvious. He didn't center his life around the usual circles, didn't rely on the same networks, and didn't build his identity around the industry itself. Over time, patterns begin to emerge. Stability where there's usually chaos. Longevity where there's usually constant change. Decisions that prioritize something deeper over something more visible. Even the way he structured his personal life reflects this difference, showing consistency in areas where others often struggle. And perhaps most telling of all is how intentional everything appears when viewed as a whole. It doesn't look like avoidance. It looks like discipline. Like someone who understood early on that staying grounded required stepping away from certain aspects of that world. And while others might see that as unusual, it may be exactly what allowed him to reach a point where he could make a decision like this without hesitation, because he wasn't tied to the system in the same way others were. Long before the fame, the recognition, and the influence, there was a moment that seemed small at the time, but would later take on a completely different meaning. He was young, still figuring out his path, sitting in a place that had nothing to do with the future people now associate him with. Then, someone walked in and said something that didn't align with anything happening in his life at that moment. It wasn't about success in the traditional sense. It wasn't about acting or recognition. It was something entirely different, something that didn't even seem realistic given where he was standing at the time. The words were unexpected, almost strange, and yet they were written down and kept, not because they made sense, but because something about them felt worth remembering. Years passed, then decades, and life took him in a direction that looked completely separate from that moment. But looking back, it's hard to ignore how everything seems to circle back to it. What once sounded impossible now feels like a thread that quietly ran through his entire life. And when that realization clicks, it changes how everything else is viewed. Because it suggests that none of this was random. It was unfolding exactly the way it was meant to. Over the years, there have been others who tried to step outside the expectations of that environment, and their experiences often followed a similar pattern. At first, their decisions were seen as personal choices, but once those choices became more visible, the reaction shifted. Opportunities changed, public perception shifted, and in some cases, their careers took unexpected turns. The message wasn't always direct, but it was understood. There are certain boundaries that aren't meant to be crossed openly, especially when it comes to topics that challenge the culture of the industry. Some adapted, some stepped back, and others continued despite the consequences. What makes this pattern interesting is how consistent it appears across different individuals and different moments in time. It raises questions about how much freedom actually exists within a system that seems so open on the surface. And when placed alongside his story, it creates a contrast that's hard to ignore. Because while others faced resistance, his approach seems to have been different from the beginning. He didn't push against the system directly, he simply positioned himself in a way that allowed him to move independently of it. What ultimately sets this moment apart is not just what happened, but who it happened to. His position in the industry isn't something that can be easily challenged or dismissed. Over decades, he built a reputation that extends beyond individual roles or performances. It's a level of respect that crosses different audiences, different perspectives, and different expectations. And that kind of standing changes everything. It means that when he makes a move like this, it doesn't come with the same risks others might face. There's no easy way to criticize it, no simple narrative to turn it into something else. Instead, it forces people to simply observe and interpret. And that's where its real impact lies. Because it doesn't just reflect a personal decision. It creates a moment that others will think about long after it passes. It raises questions about priorities, about direction, and about what success actually means when viewed from the outside. And as that realization settles in, one final question remains. Not about what he will do next, but about whether anyone else will follow a similar path, or if this moment will stand alone as something few are willing to repeat.